I had just finished unpacking the last of my boxes, gazing out at what I thought was the epitome of a perfect suburban neighborhood. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and the neatly aligned houses looked like they'd been plucked straight from a real estate catalog. It was the kind of place where people waved from their porches, lawns were impeccably trimmed, and I could finally imagine settling into a quiet, peaceful life. But I had no idea my driveway was about to become the epicenter of a battle I didn't start, but one I was determined to win. It all began with the low rumble of a car engine idling outside. Peering through my window, I spotted an SUV parked squarely across my driveway. At first, I figured it was a simple mistake, maybe a lost visitor or a delivery driver who'd taken a wrong turn. But when I stepped outside to investigate, I saw her, a middle-aged woman with a rigid stance, a self-satisfied smirk, and a clipboard clutched in her hand. She stood beside the SUV like she'd just achieved something monumental. She glanced up at me, gave a curt nod, and returned to scribbling on her clipboard. I approached her, keeping my tone polite. "Excuse me, but your car's blocking my driveway." She clicked her pen and fixed me with a look that suggested I was the one inconveniencing her. "Yes, I'm aware," she said, without a trace of remorse. "I'm Linda, head of the HOA. I wanted to discuss a few things with you." I stared at her, waiting for an explanation. She didn't offer one. Instead, she waved her hand toward my lawn, then my mailbox, then back at me, as if I were supposed to decode some hidden message. "You just moved in, right?" she asked finally. "Yeah," I replied, glancing at my blocked driveway again, hoping she'd take the hint. "A few days ago." "Well," she said, tapping her clipboard, "I've noticed some issues that don't quite align with HOA standards." She paused for effect. "Your mailbox is slightly taller than regulation height. Your grass is acceptable for now, but it'll need to be mowed every Thursday to meet neighborhood expectations. And then there's the matter of your driveway." I crossed my arms. "What about my driveway?" Her smile was anything but warm. It was the kind that sent a chill down your spine. "We have a rule here about driveway usage. We maintain a certain aesthetic. Driveways should remain clear unless a vehicle is in active use. No long-term parking, no storage, no unnecessary clutter." I blinked, then pointed at my empty driveway. "There's nothing in it." "Exactly," she said, as if she'd just won an argument. "That's why I've taken the liberty of temporarily utilizing the space." I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "You parked your car in my driveway because it was empty?" "I wouldn't phrase it like that," she said with a smug little laugh. "I saw an opportunity to maintain order and make efficient use of the space. My driveway was needed for guests today, and since your vehicle wasn't present, it seemed logical." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Okay, well, I need my driveway back now." Her expression hardened. "You don't need it right this moment, do you? I'll move it later today." "That's not the point," I said, my jaw tightening. "It's my driveway. You don't get to park there." She sighed dramatically, as if I were the unreasonable one. "I thought you'd be more open to community cooperation. The HOA exists to keep this neighborhood harmonious. If everyone used their property however they pleased, we'd have chaos. Surely you understand that." I glanced around at the other houses, wondering if I'd stumbled into some authoritarian nightmare. "I understand that you need to move your car." She pursed her lips. "I'll take it under consideration." I exhaled sharply, realizing she wasn't budging without a fight. "You're taking my private property under consideration?" She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and strode off toward another neighbor's house, clipboard in hand, leaving her SUV parked firmly in front of my garage. I spent the rest of the day trying to ignore it, telling myself she might actually move it by evening. But night came and went, and the SUV remained. I knocked on her door, no answer. It wasn't until the next morning, when I saw her outside pruning her already flawless bushes, that I confronted her again. "Your car's still in my driveway," I said, my patience fraying. She barely glanced at me. "I'll move it soon." "Define soon," I pressed. She shrugged. "Before the end of the week." That was it. That was the moment I knew I had to escalate this beyond a petty argument. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. It was about control, her need to dominate everyone around her, and my right to use my own property without interference. I needed to strike back in a way she'd never forget. I didn't just want her to move her car. I wanted to ensure she and the entire HOA would never dare mess with me again. If she thought my driveway was her personal parking lot, I'd make damn sure it became anything but. That's when the idea hit me. If she didn't want me using my driveway for parking, fine, I wouldn't. I'd turn it into something far better, something that would rattle the entire neighborhood to its core, a private racetrack. She'd pushed me too far, and there wasn't a thing she or the HOA could do to stop me. The moment the plan crystallized, I knew it was perfect. If Linda wanted to play the HOA rule game, I'd outmaneuver her at it. She'd made it clear my driveway couldn't be used for standard parking, so I'd repurpose it into something she'd never see coming. Imagining the chaos it would unleash made me grin. I spent the next few hours researching, determined to make this airtight. I pored over the HOA guidelines, hunting for any clause that could trip me up. It didn't take long to spot a loophole. Nothing in the rules explicitly banned repurposing a driveway for recreational use. There were limits on permanent structures, excessive noise, and unapproved renovations, but my idea didn't violate any of those. As long as I kept it within noise ordinances and avoided permanent changes, I was golden. Still, I needed to be thorough. HOA rules weren't my only concern. I dug into local laws, checking for county regulations that might derail my racetrack dream. That's when I struck gold. A provision allowing homeowners to apply for a permit to create a private driving course on their property, provided it was for personal use and met safety standards. I nearly laughed out loud. This wasn't just a loophole, it was a legally enshrined right. Armed with that knowledge, I began crafting my plan. I wasn't going to half-ass this. If I was doing it, I was going all in. I listed everything I'd need: cones, barriers, racing flags, maybe even some makeshift grandstands for effect. I didn't want a dinky little track. I wanted it to look official, undeniable. I wanted to see Linda's face when she realized she had no power over this. Next, I rallied some allies. I knew I wasn't the only one fed up with Linda and her absurd HOA rules. In my few days here, I'd already met neighbors with their own gripes. One guy got fined for misaligned trash cans. Another woman was warned about her flower pot colors. These people were as exasperated as I was, and I figured they'd jump at the chance to join my rebellion. I made some calls, reaching out to car enthusiast friends too. When I explained my scheme, the response was unanimous. Everyone was in. Some offered extra cones and barriers. Others had professional timing gear, and one guy even had racing lights from an old go-kart track. Within hours, my plan ballooned into something bigger than I'd envisioned. The next morning, I submitted my permit application to the county. The clerk barely glanced at it before stamping approval. Apparently, hardly anyone ever requested this, so it sailed through without a hitch. It was official. My racetrack was legally sanctioned. That afternoon, I got to work. I lined cones along my driveway's edges, mapping out turns and straights. I chalked a starting line and planted small flags along the sides. Soon, neighbors wandered over, watching curiously. At first, they just stood there, puzzled. Then, one by one, they asked questions. When I explained, their faces lit up with delight. An older man named Tom chuckled and clapped me on the shoulder. "This is the best thing I've ever seen. Linda's going to flip." That was the goal. By the time I finished, the driveway was unrecognizable. Not just a parking spot, but a bona fide track. My friends arrived with their cars, eager to test it. I recorded everything. If Linda tried anything, I wanted proof. Then, right on cue, her furious voice cut through the air. "What in the world is this?" I turned to see Linda at my driveway's edge, her face contorted with rage. She scanned the cones, the flags, the growing crowd, then glared at me, speechless for once. I smiled. "Oh, hey, Linda. Just setting up my private driving course." You can't do this," she sputtered. "This is against the rules." I crossed my arms. "Actually, it's not. HOA rules don't ban driveway repurposing, and I've got a county-approved permit." Her face reddened, her jaw clenching. "This is a disturbance. You can't turn a residential property into some amusement park." I held up my permit. "Legally, I can. And before you mention noise, I've checked. We're under the county's ordinance limits." For the first time since meeting her, Linda was speechless. Better yet, the crowd of neighbors watching grinned and whispered, enjoying her meltdown. She wasn't just losing control, she was losing it publicly. "I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting," she snapped through gritted teeth. I shrugged. Go for it. She stormed off, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. As soon as she was gone, someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds, the crowd was cheering. I couldn't help but laugh. A friend slapped my back. Dude, this is epic. Another grinned. Let's make it official. First race starts now. Without hesitation, we fired up the engines. Tires squealed as the first car tore through the track, the roar drowning out any lingering frustration. This wasn't just about winning a point anymore. It was about reclaiming my freedom from HOA tyranny. And as I watched the car zip around my driveway, I knew this was just the beginning. The engines roared as the first car sped down my newly christened racetrack. The smell of burning rubber filled the air as tires screeched against the pavement. Neighbors gathered, some laughing, some recording, others watching in stunned silence. My driveway was transformed, and Linda and the HOA were powerless to stop it. The first lap was a test run by my friend Jake, who'd brought his custom-tuned Charger. He navigated the cones like a pro, drifting through turns to cheers from the crowd. He pulled up beside me, grinning. Man, this is the best idea you've ever had. This track's actually fun. I smirked. I aimed to please. Next up was my buddy Ryan, revving his tricked-out Subaru. He lined up, I gave the signal, and he launched forward, tires spinning as he accelerated. The energy was electric. More people trickled in, drawn by the noise and spectacle. It was becoming a real event, something this rigid, rule-obsessed neighborhood had never seen. Then, as expected, the HOA cavalry arrived. Linda charged down the sidewalk, arms flailing, shouting over the engines. Two board members trailed her, looking angry and bewildered. She was beyond furious. She was incandescent. This is outrageous, she screeched. This is a residential neighborhood, not a racetrack. I turned to her, feigning innocence. Oh, Linda, glad you could join us. Want a lap? Her face turned scarlet. You're in violation of HOA policies. I demand you shut this down now. I leaned against my car, pulling out the permit. Actually, I'm not. HOA rules don't restrict recreational driveway use, and this is a county-sanctioned private driving course. I'm following every rule. She snatched the paper, scanning it furiously. The board members peered over her shoulder, their anger morphing into frustration. They saw what I already knew. They had no leverage. This is ridiculous, Linda muttered. This isn't what driveways are for. I shrugged. That's subjective. To me, it's for fun. To you, it's for parking cars you don't own. Different perspectives. Her jaw clenched. This is a disturbance. The noise alone is unacceptable. I pulled out my phone, tapping the decibel meter app I'd downloaded for this exact moment. Actually, we're still within county limits. I checked. She looked ready to explode. The board members exchanged glances, realizing they were outmatched. One, an older guy named Paul, sighed. Technically, he's right. Nothing in the bylaws bans this. Linda's nostrils flared. Then we need an emergency meeting to draft a new rule. I chuckled. Go ahead, Linda. But new rules aren't retroactive. I'll keep racing until the next voting cycle. By then, maybe everyone will have their own tracks. A few onlookers laughed. Linda glanced around, realizing she wasn't just fighting me. She was losing the neighborhood's support. People were enjoying this. This isn't over, she hissed, storming off. The races resumed, more neighbors joining in, some with cars, others with bikes and scooters. What began as revenge was becoming a community event. That evening, as the sun set, I sat on my porch, watching the last cars leave. The track was a hit, but I knew Linda wouldn't quit. Sure enough, the next morning, an HOA notice was taped to my door, a summons to an urgent compliance meeting about unauthorized modifications and excessive noise. I laughed. They were desperate, but I wasn't worried. I'd covered my bases. I spent the day refining the track, adding barriers, and tweaking the layout. Friends helped, installing a digital timer for lap times. If the HOA thought they could intimidate me, they'd soon learn how stubborn I could be. That evening, more neighbors showed up, some to race, others to watch. Teens live-streamed it, the online chat buzzing with excitement. Then, mid-race, police lights flashed down the street. Linda stood beside the cruiser, arms crossed, smirking. I sighed. She'd escalated. The officer approached. We got a call about illegal street racing. I raised my hands. This isn't street racing. It's a permitted private driving course, all legal. I handed over the permit. He read it, then glanced at Linda. This checks out. Nothing we can do. But it's loud. It's disruptive, she protested. If it exceeds noise limits, file a complaint with the county, the officer said. But this is within regulations. He returned my permit. Try to keep it reasonable, okay? Of course, officer. We always follow the rules. Linda stomped her foot as the cop drove off. She'd lost again. As she left, someone shouted, "Next race." Engines roared, the crowd cheered, and I smiled. Linda's last shot had missed. The next morning, another HOA notice arrived, thicker, stuffed with complaints about community standards violations and safety hazards. It was a frantic attempt to bend the rules against me. I wasn't fazed. I checked county laws. They had no legal ground. That afternoon, I saw Linda canvassing the street, clipboard in hand, rallying signatures for a new bylaw to ban non-traditional driveway usage. Most neighbors nodded politely but didn't commit. Some flat out refused. She was losing grip. That evening, an HOA email announced an emergency meeting to address neighborhood disruptions. I laughed. They weren't subtle. The next day, the community center was packed, not just with HOA loyalists, but with younger neighbors who loved the races. Linda stood up front, launching into a melodramatic tirade about the neighborhood's descent into chaos, blaming certain individuals for flouting rules. She waved a stack of papers. I've drafted an amendment to ban disruptive driveway activities, unapproved modifications, and enforce stricter noise rules. This will restore order. I yawned loudly. People chuckled. She glared but pressed on. We need a majority vote. Noncompliance means fines, legal action, even liens. I stood. So, you're changing the rules because you don't like what I'm doing, legally? This is about standards, she snapped. No, it's about control. Linda's been harassing everyone for years, fining people for curtain colors or parking angles. Now she's mad she can't stop me. Murmurs of agreement rippled through. I held up my phone. By the way, the races are viral. Over 1 million views. People online love it. That's the problem, she cried. We're not a spectacle. A neighbor piped up. Why not? This is the most fun we've had here. Another added. I'd rather watch races than hear about lawn decor. Linda's face flushed. Vote now. She distributed ballots, hands trembling. After counting, her expression crumbled. The amendment failed. The room erupted in applause. A board member took the mic. The matter's settled. The racetrack's legal, no new rules. Linda stormed out. Neighbors congratulated me as I left. Tom grinned. You dethroned the HOA queen. The next day, I hosted the biggest race yet. A barbecue popped up. Kids made Linda 500 signs. It wasn't just a track. It was a community celebration. Linda stayed hidden. Weeks later, her house went up for sale. She couldn't handle a neighborhood she couldn't rule. The day she moved out, I watched from my porch, sipping coffee. She left silently, defeated. The HOA mellowed without her. Fines stopped, rules relaxed. The track faded eventually, but its legacy endured. Months later, a new family moved into Linda's old place, parking a muscle car in their driveway. I introduced myself. The owner, a car buff, laughed when I mentioned the track. Man, I'd have moved here sooner. The neighborhood found a new rhythm. Still an HOA community, but livable. People were friendlier, freer. What started as a driveway dispute became a rebellion that reshaped everything. Sitting on my porch, watching my new neighbor polish his car, I smiled. I hadn't just won. I'd changed it all.